The verse was written in the dust on the old kitchen table where no one had eaten for almost 6 years. Claire Donovan saw it before she saw the broken screen door, before she noticed the sagging ceiling above the sink, before she smelled the mice in the pantry or the rain-swollen wood around the windows. Her headlights had just faded from the farmhouse wall, and the spring wind outside was pushing across the empty fields west of Des Moines, rattling the dry cornstalks that had survived the winter along the fence line. She had come with a real estate folder under one arm, a flashlight in one hand, and a heart full of reasons to be done with the place forever. But on the table, traced by a finger through years of gray dust, were the words she had spent most of her adult life refusing to hear. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. Claire stood in the doorway and did not breathe. The beam of her flashlight trembled across the kitchen. Dust lay thick on the chairs, the windowsills, the old enamel stove, the mason jars on the shelf, the framed photograph of a white church that still hung crooked beside the back door. No footprints marked the floor except her own, made moments earlier when she pushed her way inside. No fresh tracks crossed the dust around the table. No one had been here. Not a realtor. Not a neighbor. Not a curious teenager from town. The locks had been stiff. The porch boards had groaned under her weight as though protesting the return of any living thing. Yet the words were there, clean and certain, written in a hand that did not look like hers, though she knew before she admitted it that she had seen those letters all her life. Her father had made his capital F like a fence post, straight and stubborn. His lowercase g always curled back under itself, as if unwilling to let go. Claire tightened her grip on the flashlight. "No," she whispered. The house did not answer. Outside, thunder rolled low over the fields. Rain had followed her from the city in uneven bursts, first misting the windshield, then striking hard enough to blur the gravel road as she drove the last mile toward the Donovan farm. In daylight, she knew the place would look smaller than memory. Most childhood houses did. But arriving after sunset had made it enormous again. The barn leaned in the dark like an old animal. The windbreak of cottonwoods moaned behind the machine shed. The empty silo stood against the pewter sky, a black column pointing nowhere. She had not meant to arrive at night, but the bank had called at 4, the attorney at 4:30, and by 5 she had thrown clothes into an overnight bag, left her apartment in Des Moines, and driven out with anger enough to keep her awake. She had come to sell the land. That was the sentence she repeated whenever hesitation crept close. Sell the land, pay the debt, close the estate, end the calls, end the reminders, end the ache that came every time an envelope arrived with her father's name printed above hers. Harold Donovan had been dead 8 months, and still he managed to complicate her life. Past due taxes, a disputed boundary line, a tractor loan he had co-signed for a neighbor and never mentioned, a stack of medical bills from the last winter of his life. The farmhouse had sat abandoned since his funeral because Claire had not been able to cross the threshold without feeling 17 again. Furious in the upstairs hallway, hearing him say, "You'll understand one day," in that calm, maddening voice, she had not understood. She still did not want to. The real estate agent, a brisk woman named Marlene Fisk, had been clear. Developers were buying parcels outside Des Moines faster than farmers could argue with them. The old road would be widened within 3 years. A warehouse company had already made an offer on the neighboring acreage. The Donovan farm was not beautiful to Claire. It was equity. It was relief. It was a way out from under the debt collectors and late notices and the humiliating way her credit card had been declined at a grocery store 2 weeks earlier while a college kid bagged her apples and pretended not to notice. "Sentiment is expensive," Marlene had said on the phone. "Land is simple." Claire wanted land to be simple. She wanted dust to be dust. She wanted a dead man's handwriting to stay in old birthday cards and not appear across a table in an empty kitchen. She stepped closer despite herself. The words glowed faintly under the flashlight beam, each letter carved through the dust to the dark oak beneath. She remembered the table before it became a relic. Her mother rolling pie crust on it in a cloud of flour. Her father reading seed catalogs there in January while snow pressed against the windows. Claire doing algebra homework with one knee tucked under her, chewing pencil erasers, waiting for her father to look up and say something ordinary that might feel like approval. He seldom did. Not in the way she needed. He was more likely to ask if the barn cat had been fed or whether she had checked the oil in the truck. Love, in Harold Donovan's house, wore work gloves and spoke in instructions. Her mother, Anne, had been the translator. He notices more than you think, she would say when Claire slammed a door because her father did not come to a school play or forgot to compliment her report card. Your dad feels things deep. He just doesn't always know how to put them where people can see. Claire had believed that until her mother died. After that, no one translated him, and the house became a place of unanswered sentences. The wind pushed the back door against its swollen frame. The sound snapped Claire back. She set the flashlight on the counter, pulled out her phone, and took a picture of the words. The screen reflected her face. 38. Rain-damp brown hair escaping from a clip, dark circles beneath gray eyes, jaw set in the old Donovan way she hated when she caught it in the mirror. The phone showed 1 bar of service, then none. Of course, she muttered. She wiped the dust with her sleeve before she could think better of it. The verse vanished into a gray smear. At once the kitchen felt colder. Claire stared at the place where the words had been. A ridiculous pulse of grief moved through her, swift and unwelcome. She had wanted the verse gone. She had made it gone. Yet the table looked emptier now, like a mouth shut too soon. Good, she said aloud. Good. The house took her word and returned it as silence. She found the breaker box in the mudroom and discovered what she expected. No electricity. The power had been shut off months earlier. She had brought a battery lantern, a sleeping bag, bottled water, and 2 granola bars because paying for a hotel felt irresponsible when she owned, technically, a farmhouse full of beds. She had told herself she could stay one night, photograph the obvious damage, meet Marlene in the morning, sign what needed signing, and be finished. The mudroom smelled of old boots, oil, and the faint sourness of damp plaster. Her father's work coat still hung on a peg. The brown canvas shoulders collapsed inward as if his body had only just stepped out. Claire looked away. In the kitchen, the old calendar on the wall remained open to November 6 years ago, the month after her mother's funeral. A faded picture of a red barn in snow seemed almost cruel in its cheerfulness. Beneath it, in Donovan's handwriting, were notes that had not mattered for years. Dentist, church potluck, Claire call? The question mark pierced more than the words in the dust. Claire had not called enough. That was true, but neither had Harold. Phones worked both ways. Bridges worked both ways. She had built a life in Des Moines, then Chicago for graduate school, then back to Des Moines when the job in finance promised stability and delivered exhaustion. Her father had remained on the farm, aging into greater silence, mailing Christmas checks with no letters inside the cards. When she phoned, he asked about the car before asking about her. When she visited, he commented on tire tread, not her promotion. When she left, he stood on the porch with one hand raised and turned back inside before she reached the end of the lane. Indifference, she had decided, was a quiet thing. Now the house around her seemed full of that quiet. She moved through the ground floor with the lantern. The living room was sheet-draped furniture, a cold fireplace, and the old upright piano no one had tuned since and died. A hymnal lay on the bench, cover cracked, spine taped. Claire remembered her mother playing "It Is Well With My Soul" on Sunday afternoons, not impressively, often missing a note in the second line, but with such tenderness that even Harold would pause in the doorway and listen with his cap in his hands. Claire had sung then, a small girl's voice rising bright and unashamed. She had once believed every word adults placed before her. Grace, mercy, providence, Father in heaven. The language had felt warm in childhood, like quilts pulled from the dryer. Later, after hospital rooms and missed apologies, it felt like a vocabulary other people used when they did not know what else to say. She walked past the piano. The dining room still held the china cabinet with its glass doors cloudy. Inside were plates used only for Thanksgiving, the silver gravy boat shaped like a little ship, her mother's blue glass vase. Claire made a note to ask an estate sale company whether any of it had value. The thought made her feel practical and cruel at the same time. Upstairs, the floorboards complained. Her childhood room smelled of dust and old wallpaper. The bedspread was covered in a sheet. The closet door stuck. On the wall, faint rectangles showed where posters had hung. A horse, a national park, a band she had loved for exactly one summer. She opened a drawer in the desk and found a dried-up pen, a folded note from a high school friend, and a church camp bracelet braided in green and white thread. For a moment, she saw herself at 15, sunburned and laughing, standing by a lake with other teenagers while a counselor strummed a guitar and told them Jesus knew every hidden corner of their hearts and loved them anyway. At 15, Claire had wanted to be known. At 38, she considered being known a liability. She chose her parents' old room for sleeping because the bed was larger and because she refused to be chased by memory into acting like a child. She unrolled the sleeping bag on top of the mattress, kept her shoes on, and lay with the lantern beside her. Wind pushed at the house. Branches scraped the siding. Somewhere in the wall, something small moved, then stopped. Claire stared into the dark. Her phone buzzed with a single incoming text when service briefly returned. Marlene, still good for 9 tomorrow? Buyer rep may join. Great opportunity if you're ready. Claire typed, yes, I'm ready. The message failed to send. She turned the phone face down and closed her eyes. But sleep would not come. Her mind kept returning to the table, to the vanished verse, to the shape of her father's letters. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. The words had no right to be there. Her father had never been theatrical. He would not have planned a posthumous riddle. He barely remembered to label boxes. And yet he had written scripture on feed sacks, envelopes, tractor manuals, receipts, scraps of wood, anything near his hand when a thought took him. And used to find verses tucked into seed catalogs or taped to the bathroom mirror. Harold never explained them. He would simply leave them where life happened, as if the word belonged among grocery lists and socket wrenches. Claire hated that she remembered this. Near 3 in the morning, thunder cracked so hard the windows shuddered. Claire sat up, heart racing. In the brief electric white of lightning, she saw the bedroom door standing open, though she was certain she had closed it. Her breath caught. Then darkness returned, and with it reason. Old houses shifted. Latches failed. Storms made everything seem alive. She got up to close the door. On the hallway floor lay an envelope. It had not been there before. She was sure. But the house was full of papers. The wind could have pushed it from a shelf, from under a door, from anywhere. She bent and picked it up. The paper was yellowed, stiff, and addressed in her mother's handwriting. For Claire when she comes home angry. Claire sat down on the floor. The hallway seemed to narrow around her. Rain hammered the roof. Her mother had been dead 14 years. Claire was angry. She had come home angry. And there, in her hand, was an envelope written by the only person who had ever known how to name the weather inside her without making her feel ashamed. She did not open it. She carried it downstairs, placed it on the kitchen table beside the smear in the dust, and sat across from it until dawn. Morning came gray and wet, revealing the farm in all its tired truth. The yard was overgrown. The fence behind the barn had collapsed. Weeds grew through the gravel. The barn roof had lost shingles in a pattern that looked almost intentional, like a map of neglect. Beyond the house, the fields rolled flat and dark, waiting for spring work no one had done. Claire made coffee with a camping kettle on a propane burner she had brought, burned her tongue, and opened her laptop. No internet. She looked at the envelope. It looked back, patient as the dead. At 8:40, a blue SUV pulled into the lane, followed by Marlene's silver sedan. Claire tucked the envelope under a folder without opening it. Marlene Fisk entered the house wearing rubber boots, a cream coat, and the expression of someone who believed any problem could be solved by pricing it correctly. "Claire, good morning." "Oh." She looked around the kitchen, nostrils tightening slightly. "We'll want to emphasize land value over structure." A man in a navy jacket stepped in behind her. "Daniel Pierce," he said, offering a hand. "Representing Prairie Meridian Logistics." Claire shook it. His grip was dry and confident. "Claire Donovan. We appreciate you considering our offer," Daniel said. "This property is well-positioned." Well-positioned. Not home. Not farm. Not graveyard of meals and arguments and prayers. Positioned. Marlene set her tablet on the table, exactly where the verse had been. "The house is likely a teardown, but the acreage—" "It is not a teardown," Claire said before she knew she would. Marlene paused. Claire forced herself to breathe. "I mean, I know it may not be worth restoring, but let's not say it like that." "Of course," Marlene said smoothly. "I only mean from a development standpoint." Daniel looked around with polite detachment. "We would conduct environmental assessment, survey review, access planning. The preliminary number is strong, especially considering outstanding liabilities." Claire hated that he knew about the liabilities. She hated more that the number in the folder could solve immediate problems. Medical bills, tax penalties, credit cards, the private loan she had taken after losing her job during the restructuring and then falling behind when consulting work slowed. Debt had a way of making every sentimental choice seem childish. They toured the house. Marlene clicked photos. Daniel measured rooms with his eyes. Claire followed, answering questions in a voice that sounded professional and far away. Upstairs, Daniel asked whether any personal items would be removed before closing. "All of them," Claire said. "It was impossible, of course. There were decades here. Boxes in closets. Tools in the machine shed. Her mother's canning jars. Her father's ledgers. The Bible in the parlor, maybe, if it was still there. She had planned to hire a company to clear it. Strangers with gloves and trucks, reducing a life to donation, disposal, appraisal." In the living room, Marlene noticed the piano. "Could be charming in staging photos if we clean it up." Daniel pressed one key. A sour note trembled through the room. Claire remembered her mother laughing when the same key stuck during Christmas carols. Harold had reached into the piano with his large farmer's hand, adjusted something, and made it worse, and had kissed his cheek anyway. "Please don't touch that," Claire said. Daniel withdrew his hand. "Sorry." By the time they returned to the kitchen, Claire's headache had sharpened. Marlene opened the folder. "The buyer is prepared to move quickly. Given your timeline and financial goals, I'd strongly recommend serious consideration." Daniel slid a letter of intent across the table. Claire looked at the number. It was enough. Not generous exactly. Not what the land might be worth in 5 years. But enough to stop the bleeding. Enough to pay the estate debts and her own most urgent ones. Enough to breathe. She reached for the pen Marlene offered. As she did, the edge of the hidden envelope slid out from under her folder. Her mother's handwriting appeared between the purchase documents and the letter of intent. "For Claire when she comes home angry." Marlene saw it and looked away politely. Daniel checked his phone. Claire's fingers closed around the pen. She could sign now. She could make the old house someone else's problem. She could reduce the kitchen, the verse, the envelope, her father, all of it to money transferred by wire. "Claire," Marlene said gently, "no pressure. But the offer window may narrow." That sentence should have pushed her forward. Instead, it made something in her stand still. "I need time," Claire said. Marlene's smile tightened. "Of course. How much time?" "A few days." Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Marlene. "We can hold terms until Friday." Then Friday. After they left, Claire stood in the doorway and watched their cars disappear down the lane. The wind moved over the wet fields, carrying the smell of black soil and thawing grass. Somewhere far off, a red-winged blackbird called from a ditch. She had not realized how much she missed that sound. Inside, the house waited. Claire made herself sit at the kitchen table. She picked up the envelope, turned it over, and slid a finger beneath the flap. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written in blue ink on stationery with tiny yellow flowers along the top. Her mother's handwriting was weaker than Claire remembered from grocery lists and birthday cards. This had been written near the end, then, when cancer had taken and Donovan's strength but not her clarity. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, it means you came back to the farm carrying more than a suitcase. I know you, sweetheart. You do not travel light when it comes to hurt. You pack every old word, every disappointment, every unanswered question, and then you pretend the bag is not heavy. I am writing this because there may come a day when your father cannot say what needs saying, and you may not believe him if he tries. Harold is a good man with locked doors inside him. I have spent most of my marriage learning how to knock without bruising my hand. He loves you, Claire. I know you are angry that he does not say it in the language you need. I have been angry for you sometimes. But please do not confuse silence with absence. There are things about your schooling, your bills, and your leaving that you do not know. I wanted us to tell you together when the time was right. Your father kept saying later. Later is a dangerous word. It makes fools of careful people. If later never comes, look in the blue recipe tin behind the flour canister. Read everything before you decide what kind of man he was. Forgive what you can. Ask Jesus to help with the rest. He is not offended by honest anger. He carried worse than ours and still opened his hands. I love you past the edge of this life. Mom. Claire read the letter once. Then again. The words blurred. She pressed the paper flat with both hands as if it might lift from the table and vanish like dust. The blue recipe tin. Her chair scraped back so hard it nearly tipped. She crossed to the pantry, heart pounding. The flour canister was still there, ceramic painted with blue wheat. Behind it sat the tin, dented, familiar. Her mother had kept recipe cards in it. Rhubarb pie, pot roast, Christmas sugar cookies, potato soup for sick days. Claire lifted it down and opened the lid. Inside were no recipes. There were envelopes, bank statements, receipts, copies of checks, letters folded carefully. A photograph of Claire at college orientation standing under an archway, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. She remembered that day as one of the loneliest of her life. Her father had not come. He said harvest would not allow it. Her mother had driven her instead, stayed cheerful until they hugged goodbye, and cried only after Claire turned away. For years, Claire had believed his absence proved the truth. Work mattered more. She picked up the first envelope. It contained a letter from the financial aid office dated 19 years earlier, confirming receipt of a payment toward tuition. The payer listed Harold Donovan. Claire frowned. Her scholarships and loans had covered most of college. She had worked in the library. Her mother had helped where she could. Her father, she thought, had contributed grudgingly, if at all. The second envelope held a bank statement showing a withdrawal from a farm operating account. The amount matched the tuition payment. The third contained a handwritten note from and to Harold. I know you sold the South 42 cheap, but she will get her chance. One day she will understand what it cost you. Maybe do not tell her in a way that sounds like blame. Claire sat down on the pantry floor. The South 40. She remembered the argument. She had been 18, home for Thanksgiving, and heard her parents speaking in low, urgent voices. Her father said the land was gone and that was that. Her mother cried. When Claire asked, Harold snapped that farm business was not her concern. Months later, she learned he had sold acreage that had belonged to his father. She assumed he had mismanaged money. She assumed the tension in the house was another failure of his pride. The next envelopes told the story in pieces. A payment to cover her dorm balance the semester she nearly had to withdraw. A check to a hospital in Chicago after she broke her wrist and did not have enough insurance. A letter from the bank approving a loan restructure after Harold used equipment as collateral. A copy of a money order sent to Claire during graduate school, The exact amount she thought came from an anonymous alumni emergency fund. A note in Harold's handwriting, written on the back of a seed invoice. Do not tell Claire. Let her think she earned it. She did. Claire covered her mouth. She had earned some of it. She had worked hard. She had studied until 2 in the morning, lived on cheap soup, graduated with honors. But beneath her effort had been a hidden floor built by hands she had accused of withholding. Her father had paid and said nothing. Worse, he had sometimes acted indifferent because he thought giving without being seen preserved her dignity. Or his pride. Or both. The motives were tangled, human, imperfect, but not empty. The tin held more. When Claire moved to Chicago and did not come home for Christmas, Harold sent a check through, and so Claire would not know. When Anne died and Claire stopped visiting except when obligated, Harold continued paying the last of a private student loan she thought had been forgiven after administrative error. He kept a ledger of every payment, not to collect from Claire, but to track what he called Claire's Road. On one page, beneath columns of numbers, he had written a prayer. Lord Jesus, keep her road open. If she cannot come home yet, go with her where I cannot. Claire bowed over the tin and wept. The sound filled the pantry, raw and embarrassed. But there was no one to hear except the house and perhaps the God she had avoided because he had always seemed too close to her father. She cried not only because she had misjudged him, but because being wrong did not erase the pain of being lonely. The letters did not turn Harold Donovan into a perfect man. They did not make him present at the school play or tender after Anne's funeral. They did not give back years of stilted phone calls. But they struck the stone in her chest, and beneath the stone there was water she had not expected. When the tears slowed, she carried the tin to the kitchen and spread everything across the table. The dust smeared under her sleeves. Sunlight broke through the clouds and showed how many particles floated in the room, disturbed by her movement after years of rest. She spent the day reading. She found postcards Harold never mailed. Dear Claire, the beans are late this year. Saw a red fox near the creek. Hope Chicago is treating you kind. He had stopped there. Another. Claire, your mother would have liked the blue scarf you wore in the picture. I do too. Never sent. Another, proud of you. No other words. Just proud of you, written 3 times on a feed store receipt, crossed out twice. By afternoon, Claire was angry again, but the anger had changed shape. It no longer stood like a wall between her and her father. It moved wildly, searching for someone to blame for the tragedy of 2 people loving each other in languages neither could translate. She was angry that he had hidden generosity behind gruffness. Angry that her mother had died before explaining. Angry that pride had wasted so much. Angry that she had needed words, and he had given money instead, sacrifice instead, prayers scribbled on invoices instead. Angry that love could be real and still fail to arrive in the form required. At 4, an old pickup turned into the lane. Claire wiped her face and stepped onto the porch. The truck stopped beside the barn. A man climbed out, tall and thin, with a gray beard, a seed cap, and a cautious expression. She recognized him after a second. Mr. Harlan? Ben, he said. Nobody's called me Mr. Harlan since Sunday school went downhill. Ben Harlan owned the farm to the east. He had been Harold's closest neighbor and, if Claire remembered correctly, his closest friend, though Harold used the word friend sparingly. I saw a car, Ben said. Thought I'd check. Didn't mean to intrude. It's okay. He looked at the house. Been a while since there were lights in the kitchen. There aren't lights. Just a lantern. Still counts from the road. They stood awkwardly. Claire noticed the mud on his boots, the deep creases around his eyes, the way his hands held his cap as if asking permission to stay. I heard you're selling, he said. Probably. Ben nodded. Figured. You disapprove? Not my land. That's not an answer. He smiled faintly. You sound like your mother. The name loosened something in her. Did you know? Know what? She stepped aside. You might as well come in. In the kitchen, Ben removed his cap. His eyes went at once to the papers on the table. He did not touch them. Farmers, Claire thought, knew how to respect another person's papers. You knew he paid for school, she said. Ben exhaled slowly. Some. Why didn't anyone tell me? Wasn't mine to tell. That's convenient. His eyes flicked to hers, not defensive but steady. Yes, sometimes silence is convenient. Sometimes it's cowardly. Sometimes it's loyalty. Usually it's a mix. Claire folded her arms. He let me think he didn't care. Ben pulled out a chair, then paused. May I? She nodded. He sat heavily. Your dad cared so much it made him stupid. The bluntness startled her. He didn't know how to talk to you after and past, Ben continued. Before either, if we're honest. Harold had this notion that if he told you what he gave up, it would burden you. He'd say, she needs to fly clean. No guilt tied to her ankles. I told him children are not birds and fathers are not airports. But Harold was Harold. Claire almost laughed and cried at once. That sounds like him. He was proud of you. He never said it. No, Ben looked at the receipt where the words had been crossed out. But he practiced. Claire sat across from him. Practiced? Ben nodded toward the papers. In the barn. In the truck. At my kitchen table over bad coffee. Proud of you, Claire. He'd say it like he was learning a foreign language. Then he'd get red in the face and change the subject to soybean prices. Claire pressed her fingers to her mouth. Ben's voice softened. He was not easy. I won't make him a saint because dead men can't correct us. He could be stubborn, harsh, scared of softness. He hurt you. I know that. The acknowledgement mattered. Claire did not know how much until she heard it. But he loved you, Ben said. That was never in question to those of us close enough to see the wreckage he made trying to hide it. Claire looked toward the table, to the place where the verse had been. Did you come in here recently? No. Did anyone? Not that I know. She showed him the photo on her phone. The verse, clear in dust. Ben studied it. His face did not become theatrical. He simply grew very quiet. His handwriting? She asked. Yes. But how? Ben handed the phone back. I don't know. That doesn't bother you? Plenty bothers me. Mystery does not always make the top of the list. Claire gave a short, unbelieving laugh. Ben looked toward the crooked church photograph on the wall. Your dad came here a week before he died. Against medical advice and common sense. Asked me to drive him. He could barely make the porch steps. Said he needed to sit at the table one more time. Claire's throat tightened. You brought him? I did. He was supposed to be in hospice. He was also Harold Donovan. The nurses were saints. I was not brave enough to tell him no. What did he do? Ben rubbed the brim of his cap between his fingers. Sat there. Put his hand on the table. Cried a little when he thought I wasn't looking. Asked me to find your mother's Bible, but I couldn't. We prayed. Or I prayed while he breathed hard. Then he took his finger and wrote something in the dust. Claire stared at him. He wrote that? She whispered. I suppose. Ben nodded slowly. I didn't look close. Felt private. Wind came through the screen door and the dust moved some after. Could have stayed hidden until the light hit it right. Could have been there all along waiting for you to stand in the right place. Claire thought of the words appearing when the flashlight crossed them, as if the table had waited years for that narrow beam. What did he say? She asked. Ben closed his eyes briefly, remembering. He said, if she comes angry, maybe the Lord can start there. Claire stood abruptly and walked to the sink. The faucet, when she turned it, groaned and gave nothing. She laughed once because tears had become too predictable. Ben remained at the table. I'm sorry, Claire. For what? For being one of the people who knew pieces and didn't help put them where you could see. She turned. Would it have changed anything? I don't know. But maybe you deserved the chance. They sat until evening. Ben told her stories slowly, not to defend Harold but to complicate him. How Harold took extra snow removal jobs to make a tuition payment. How he sat in the last pew of church after and died and never sang, but also never left before the final blessing. How he mailed Claire's articles from business journals to himself because he did not understand the internet but wanted to save proof of her work. How one year he drove to Chicago for a conference where she was presenting, stood in the hotel lobby, saw her laughing with colleagues, and left without speaking because he decided she looked too happy to need an awkward father. "That is infuriating," Claire said. "Yes," Ben replied. "And heartbreaking." "Yes." When Ben rose to leave, he set a small envelope on the table. "I almost forgot. Harold gave me this before he died. Said if you sold fast, I should give it after. If you stayed long enough to read the tin, I should give it before." I decided not to be as foolish as he was and waited only one day. Claire looked at the envelope. Her name was written on it in Harold's hand. She did not pick it up until Ben's truck had disappeared beyond the cottonwoods. That night the house felt different. Not warm exactly. Too much dust for warmth. Too many shadows. But less hostile. Claire lit 2 lanterns and heated soup from a can. She ate at the kitchen table among papers, her mother's letter folded beside her bowl, her father's envelope unopened near her elbow. The rain had stopped. Frogs sang from the low ditch by the road. In the distance, a train horn moved across the Iowa dark, lonely and familiar. She opened Harold's letter after washing the bowl with bottled water and a paper towel. "Claire, I do not know if Ben will give this to you because I have left instructions more tangled than a junk drawer. If you have this, I am gone. I am sorry for putting that sentence on paper instead of speaking it better while I had breath. Your mother said plain words are best. I have spent my life trusting work more than words. Work made sense. Crops either came up or did not. Fence held or failed. Engines started or needed fixing. Words could be misunderstood, and I was no good at them, so I used fewer. That was my mistake. It was not humility. It was fear wearing a work shirt. I loved you from the first minute I saw you. You were red-faced, furious, and loud. I thought, there is a person who will not let the world ignore her. I was proud before you had done a thing. I know you think I did not want you to leave. Truth is, I wanted you free and I resented the cost of freedom. Not the money. Never the money. The cost was watching you learn to live without needing me. I confused my pain with disapproval and let you feel the wrong one. I paid what I could because that was the only way I knew how to keep a hand under your road. I should have told you. I should have come to the play, the graduation, the Chicago hotel ballroom. I stood outside too many rooms where I belonged and convinced myself I was being generous by staying out. Your mother forgave faster than I deserved. You do not have to. But I ask, if the Lord gives you strength someday, do not let bitterness inherit this place. Burn the papers if you need to. Sell the land if you must. But do not believe the lie that you were unloved. That lie is the one thing I beg you not to keep. I have prayed for you every morning since you left for college. Some prayers were clumsy. Some were angry. Some were only your name. I trust Jesus knew what to do with them. I love you, Claire and Donovan. Dad. The letter ended there. No flourish. No advice about tires. No mention of soybean prices. Just love, finally visible, arriving late but arriving. Claire folded forward until her forehead touched the table. For a long time she did not move. The next morning, she called Marlene and asked to postpone the decision. Marlene was not pleased. "Claire, I understand this is emotional, but delaying could cost you. I understand. The buyer may walk. I understand. Can I ask what changed?" Claire looked around the kitchen. The sun had risen clear, touching the dust in gold. "I found some things I need to understand before I sell." Marlene sighed. "Friday, Claire. Maybe." After hanging up, Claire laughed at her own audacity. Maybe did not pay debts. Maybe did not negotiate with banks. Maybe did not replace broken windows or repair roofs. But maybe, for the first time, belonged to her and not to panic. She spent the day sorting. 3 piles became 6. Keep, sell, donate, ask Ben, legal and unknown. The unknown pile grew fastest. In the parlor, she found the family Bible under a stack of quilting magazines. Her mother's name was written inside the front cover, then Harold's, then Claire's in blue ink from her baptism, then nothing. No grandchildren. No additions. The blank spaces hurt, but not as accusation. More like an unwritten invitation. She found her father's prayer notebooks in a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. They were not diaries. Harold would have considered diaries self-indulgent. They were small spiral notebooks full of weather notes, repair lists, seed prices, and prayers squeezed between practical lines. May 2nd. North fence down again. Claire finals this week. Lord, give her a clear mind and steady heart. August 19th. And pain worse. Claire called. I could not say enough. Forgive me. Keep my girl soft where the world wants her hard. December 24th. Sent card. No letter. Coward. Jesus, find her in the city tonight. March 8th. Dreamed and was singing. Woke crying. Tell Claire somehow. The notebooks undid her more slowly than the letters. Each entry revealed not one hidden act, but a habit. He had carried her daily. Awkwardly. Silently. Sometimes resentfully, perhaps. But daily. The truth did not erase the wounds. It placed them in a larger field where love had been growing unseen, stubborn as winter wheat beneath snow. By Thursday, Claire had filled 10 trash bags, cried 7 times, laughed twice, and learned the furnace was dead. She had also discovered that the farmhouse was in worse condition than she imagined. A contractor from town shook his head at the foundation, the roof, the plumbing, the wiring. Could be restored, he said, in the cautious tone of men who do not want to crush women holding old letters. But it won't be cheap. How much? He gave a range that made Claire sit on the porch steps after he left and stare at the fields without blinking. That evening, she drove into Des Moines for the first time since arriving at the farm. Her apartment felt foreign, too clean and narrow, full of unopened bills on the counter and work clothes draped over a chair. She showered, changed, and met her younger cousin Beth at a diner near the interstate because Beth had texted 3 times and threatened to show up at the farm with pie. Beth arrived with pie anyway, in a cardboard box. You look terrible, Beth said, sliding into the booth. Good to see you too. I mean spiritually terrible. Like you fought a ghost and the ghost made valid points. Claire laughed despite herself. Beth had inherited the blunt Donovan gene and polished it with kindness. Over coffee, Claire told her everything. The verse, the letters, the tuition payments, Ben, Harold's apology. Beth listened with both elbows on the table, eyes wet. I knew Uncle Harold helped some, Beth said finally. Mom mentioned it once. I didn't know the extent. Everyone knew except me. Not everyone. Enough. Beth reached across the table. Claire, he should have told you. They all should have. But don't use that as a way to avoid receiving what you found. Claire pulled her hand back. Receiving it makes me feel stupid. Why? Because I built my life on being the daughter who made it without him. And now I don't know who I am. Beth's face softened. Maybe you're still the woman who worked hard, and you're also the daughter who was helped. Those can both be true. Claire looked out the window. Semi-trucks moved along the highway, red lights fading west. I don't know how to forgive him when I still needed him to be different. Forgiveness is not pretending you didn't need what you needed. That sounds like something from a counseling podcast. It was from my pastor, actually, but he probably listens to podcasts. Claire rolled her eyes, but a smile tugged at her mouth. Beth leaned back. What are you going to do about the farm? Sell it. You don't sound convinced. I'm drowning in debt, Beth. I know. The house is a disaster. I know. I don't have time to become a farmhouse person. I cannot picture you canning peaches. Exactly. But, Claire stared at the pie box. But my mother wrote, do not let bitterness inherit this place. My father wrote the same thing in another way. And now every time I imagine bulldozers pushing through the kitchen, I feel like I'm wiping the verse away again. Beth was quiet for a moment. Then ask a different question. What question? Not, can you afford to keep it exactly as it is? Ask what love requires next. Not guilt. Not nostalgia. Love. Claire looked at her cousin. You are annoying. I brought pie. I'm allowed. What kind? Apple. Claire opened the box. Fine. Speak wisdom. Beth smiled. Maybe the farm does not have to remain a farm. Maybe restoration does not mean pretending the past was perfect. Maybe it becomes something else. Like what? I don't know. A rental? A retreat? A place for church families? Caregivers? People going through crisis? Beth shrugged. You work with finances. You understand numbers. You understand what stress does to people. You also apparently own a haunted repentance table. It is not haunted. Spiritually assertive, then. Claire laughed hard enough that the waitress looked over. That night, back at her apartment, Claire could not sleep. She opened her laptop and began searching. Rural retreat grants. Historic farmhouse restoration, Iowa. Nonprofit respite homes. Caregiver burnout ministries. Short-term lodging for families with hospitalized loved ones. Des Moines hospitals. Church partnerships. Rural community development funds. Tax implications. Insurance nightmares. Zoning. By 2 in the morning, the idea felt impossible. By 3, it felt irresponsible. By 4, it felt alive. She drove back to the farm at sunrise. On Friday, Marlene called. I need your answer, she said. Claire stood in the kitchen with Harold's letter in front of her and the purchase offer beside it. She had slept only an hour. Her hair smelled faintly of diner coffee. Her eyes burned. Outside, sunlight spread over fields her father had worked. Land his father had worked. Land that had held wheat, corn, grief, debt, silence, and prayers. I'm not selling, Claire said. Marlene was silent. Claire. I know. Do you? Probably not completely. You have real financial pressure. This offer is clean. I know. Are you making this decision because of grief? Claire looked at the table. In the dustless place where she had wiped the verse away, the oak showed darker like a scar. I'm making it because grief is not the only thing here. Marlene exhaled. What will you do? I don't know all of it yet, but I'm going to find out. After the call ended, panic crashed in. Claire sat on the floor and put her head between her knees. Not selling solved nothing immediate. The debts remained. The roof leaked. The bank did not accept spiritual breakthroughs as payment. She had turned down certainty for a story she could not yet fund. She looked up, almost angry. If this is your idea, she said to the empty kitchen, you are going to have to help with the math. It was the first prayer she had spoken in years. It was not elegant. It was barely respectful. But it was honest. The help did not arrive as a miracle check in the mailbox. It arrived in phone calls, spreadsheets, humiliating conversations, and people. Ben knew a retired electrician from church who would inspect for free. Beth knew a grant writer. Samuel County Bank, after a long meeting in which Claire laid out more vulnerability than she preferred, agreed to restructure the estate debt if she could show a viable plan. Her former finance colleague, Martin, reviewed her projections and told her twice where she was being naive, then donated his time to build a cash flow model. The little white church from the photograph, still alive under the name Hope Creek Community Church, had a pastor named Laura Mills who listened to Claire's idea without blinking. A retreat house for families in crisis, Pastor Laura said, hands wrapped around a mug of tea in the church office. Caregivers, people grieving, parents with children in treatment, families who need a week somewhere quiet. Not a church camp, Claire said quickly. I don't want to manipulate people when they're vulnerable. Good. Jesus never needed manipulation. I'm not qualified to run a ministry. Most people in Scripture were not qualified when called. Also, this may be less about running a ministry and more about opening a door. Claire shifted in the chair. I don't even know where I stand with God. Pastor Laura smiled. Standing is not required for beginning. Some people crawl. That should be on your sign. It would concern the trustees. Claire laughed. Pastor Laura's expression became thoughtful. Why this house? Claire looked at the framed photo of a harvest festival on the office wall. Because bitterness almost inherited it. I don't want that to be the last story. The pastor nodded slowly. Then we pray, plan, and ask who else the Lord has already been preparing. The word pray made Claire uncomfortable, but not enough to leave. The summer became a season of uncovering. Volunteers from Hope Creek arrived on Saturdays with gloves, tools, casseroles, and opinions. Ben brought equipment. Beth brought labels. Pastor Laura brought coffee and a remarkable ability to make teenage volunteers clean baseboards without complaining. Claire learned that restoration was less like a television show and more like repentance. Slower, messier, expensive, full of hidden damage, and occasionally beautiful enough to keep going. They cleared the barn first. Old hay, broken boards, rusted tools, raccoon evidence no one wanted to discuss. In a wooden box near the back, Claire found her childhood bicycle bell, 3 jars of nails, and a cigar tin full of communion cups from a church picnic decades earlier. Ben told stories while they worked. Her father fixing a neighbor's combine at midnight. Her mother organizing meals after a tornado. Claire at age 8 baptizing barn cats with a garden hose until one scratched her face and Harold had to pretend not to laugh. The house yielded more letters, but none as devastating as the first. It yielded photographs, grocery lists, a tin of buttons, $2 silver, and recipes, Harold's sermon notes from the one time he was asked to speak at a men's breakfast and apparently wrote 6 drafts before saying almost nothing. On the back of one draft he had written, "Love is not less real because it is clumsy." Claire taped that line above the kitchen sink. Not everyone understood. A creditor called her foolish. Marlene sent one last email with a revised offer and the subject line still possible. Claire's boss questioned why she reduced consulting hours. A former coworker joked that she was having a midlife crisis with shiplap. Some nights, alone in the farmhouse under tarps and exposed beams, Claire wondered if they were right. On those nights, she opened Harold's notebooks. Not to idolize him. Sometimes reading them made her angry all over again. But they reminded her that love had roots deeper than evidence. He had prayed when she did not know. He had given when she misread him. He had failed in ways that mattered, and loved in ways that mattered too. One evening in August, Claire found herself sanding the kitchen table by hand. The old dust was long gone. The surface bore scratches from knives, dents from dropped pans, burns from hot pots, and one darker place where the verse had appeared. She could not see the words anymore, but she knew where they had been. She ran her palm over the scarred oak. Pastor Laura entered carrying 2 lemonades. "You look like you're either praying or preparing to fight furniture." "Both." Laura handed her a glass. "Common combination." Claire wiped sweat from her forehead. "I keep thinking about forgiveness. Dangerous. I thought forgiving him would mean the hurt stops making noise. Has it? No. Then perhaps forgiveness is not silence. Perhaps it is choosing which voice gets the final word." Claire sipped lemonade. It was too sweet. "I still wish he had been different." "You may always wish that. Can I forgive him and still say he hurt me?" "You may need to say it in order to forgive him truthfully." Claire looked at the table. "Sometimes I'm afraid that if I let myself receive his love, I'll betray the younger version of me who waited for it." Laura set her glass down. "What if receiving it now is how you go back and sit beside her?" The words entered Claire gently and stayed. That night, after everyone left, she carried a chair into the empty kitchen and sat at the table. Moonlight lay across the sanded wood. The room smelled of sawdust and lemon soap. She closed her eyes and imagined herself at 17. Arms folded, chin lifted, furious after her father criticized her college choice by asking whether she had checked tuition costs. Young Claire had heard, "You are a burden." Maybe Harold had meant, "I am afraid I cannot help enough." The difference did not erase the hurt, but it opened a window. I'm sorry, Claire whispered to the girl she had been. You deserved words. Then, after a long pause, she added, and you were loved. The farmhouse seemed to breathe. By autumn, the project had a name, the Open Table House. Beth designed a simple logo, a farmhouse table with a small cross carved into one leg, not obvious unless you looked closely. Claire insisted the mission statement be practical. A quiet rural retreat offering rest, hospitality, and support for families in crisis. No pressure, no forced programs. Prayer available upon request. Meals provided by volunteers. Counselors and pastors on referral. A library. Walking paths. Rocking chairs on the porch. A kitchen table big enough for grief, silence, laughter, and pie. The first fundraiser was held in the barn after they made it safe enough not to embarrass the insurance company. String lights hung from beams. Folding chairs filled the space where hay once stood. Local musicians played bluegrass and old hymns. Someone brought chili. Someone brought cornbread. Children chased each other near the door until Pastor Laura redirected them into stacking napkins with questionable success. Claire had dreaded speaking, but everyone expected it. She stood near the barn doors with notes shaking in her hand and looked out at neighbors, church members, donors, skeptics, and people who had known her parents better than she had allowed herself to know them. My father was not an easy man to understand, she began. A few people smiled knowingly. I spent many years believing his silence meant indifference. After he died, I returned to this farm intending to sell it as quickly as possible. I came angry. I came tired. I came with debts and plans and no interest in being changed. Ben sat in the front row, cap in his lap, eyes bright. But on the kitchen table, in dust no one had touched for years, I found a verse written in my father's hand. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. I did not want it. I wiped it away. Then I found letters, records, prayers, and a story of love I had misread for most of my life. Her voice trembled. She let it. This house is not being restored because the past was perfect. It was not. It is being restored because love was present even where we failed to see it. And because I believe there are families who need a place where pain is not rushed, where weariness is not shamed, and where the hands of Christ may meet them through ordinary people with casseroles, tools, listening ears, and time. She looked down at the notes, then folded them. I am still learning to pray. Some days my prayers are beautiful. Most days they are closer to, Lord, help. The plumbing estimate is worse than expected. But I am learning that Jesus is patient with unfinished people. This house is unfinished. So am I. Maybe that is why it can become a place of welcome. When she finished, no one moved for a second. Then applause rose, not loud at first, but steady. Beth cried openly. Ben wiped his face with his sleeve and pretended it was dust. Pastor Laura bowed her head. The fundraiser did not raise enough to finish everything. It raised enough to begin again the next day. Winter arrived early. Snow covered the fields, softening every broken thing. Work slowed but did not stop. Volunteers insulated rooms. Claire learned to paint trim. A retired teacher donated books. A hospital social worker from Des Moines visited and said, I know families who would come here. A widower donated a commercial dishwasher in memory of his wife. Someone left an envelope of cash in the church mailbox with the note, for the table. Claire spent Christmas Eve at the farmhouse. No, there was no Ethan here. She almost laughed at how often grief made her invent people to fill old seats. There was Beth, Ben, Pastor Laura, and half the church at the candlelight service in town. The sanctuary smelled of pine and wax. Claire sat in the back at first, then moved when Beth waved. They sang Silent Night by candlelight. Claire's voice was soft but present. When the pastor read about Christ being born in a place with no room, Claire thought of the farmhouse, of doors, of tables, of all the weary people who might one day arrive with more hurt than luggage. After church, she drove to the cemetery. Snow squeaked under her boots. The sky was clear, stars bright over the flat Iowa dark. Her parents' graves lay beneath a maple tree near the back. And Donovan, beloved wife and mother, Harold Donovan, faithful in the fields entrusted to him. Claire had chosen that line mechanically for the stone, using words from an old church bulletin because she could not think of anything personal at the time. Now she stood before it and understood it differently. She brushed snow from the top of the marker. Her breath rose in small white clouds. "Hi, Dad," she said. The cemetery was still. "I found the tin. And the letter. And about 12,000 ways you made everything more complicated than necessary." A laugh escaped her, breaking into tears. "I'm still angry sometimes. I need to say that. I'm angry you didn't tell me. I'm angry you stayed outside rooms where I wanted you inside. I'm angry that Mom had to carry so much translation between us. But I know now. I know you loved me. I know you were proud. I know you prayed." She knelt carefully in the snow, heedless of her coat. "I wish we had said all this when you were alive. I wish I had asked better questions. I wish you had answered the ones I didn't know how to ask. But I don't want bitterness to inherit what love paid for." Her hand rested on his name. "I forgive you," she whispered. The words hurt. They did not float upward like music. They came slowly, like a door swollen by weather finally opening. "And I'm sorry for the years I would not see what was there." She turned to her mother's name. "Thank you for leaving me directions." Snow fell from a branch behind her with a soft thud. Claire closed her eyes. For a long time she had imagined prayer as something people did when they were certain. Now she understood it more like reaching in the dark toward a hand she could not see but had begun to trust. "Jesus," she said, voice shaking. "Thank you for not letting the worst version of the story be the last one. Thank you for my mother's wisdom. For my father's hidden love, for Ben's honesty, for every person helping open that house. Forgive me for the years I made my anger the only truth. Teach me how to receive love without suspicion. Teach me how to give it plainly. And please, please let the open table house become shelter for people who are tired of being strong." The wind moved through the bare branches. No voice answered from heaven. No star shifted. But peace came, not as a flood, not as certainty, but as the quiet knowledge that gratitude had finally found room to stand beside grief. The open table house welcomed its first family the following April. They arrived in a minivan with a cracked windshield and fast food wrappers on the floor. Mark and Elise Turner had been living between hospital rooms and cheap motels for 3 months, while their 6-year-old son received treatment in Des Moines. Their older daughter, Molly, had stopped speaking much above a whisper. The social worker called Claire and asked whether the house was ready. It was not, technically. The upstairs bathroom still needed trim. One bedroom lacked curtains. The porch rail was sturdy but ugly. The garden was mud. But the beds were clean. The heat worked. The kitchen smelled of chicken soup, and Beth had left a pie cooling by the window. Claire stood on the porch as the van pulled in. Mark stepped out first, shoulders bent with the exhaustion of a man trying to be both father and infrastructure. Elise carried a tote bag and a medical binder thick with papers. Molly held a stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Welcome," Claire said. "I'm Claire. You don't have to carry everything at once. Come in and breathe first." Elise's face crumpled at the word breathe. Inside, the family stopped in the kitchen. The table had been restored, sanded smooth but not made new. Its scars remained visible beneath the finish. At the center sat a small card in a wooden holder. "You are welcome at this table exactly as you are." Molly traced a scratch in the wood. "What happened here?" Claire smiled. "Life." "Did it hurt the table?" "Yes." "Why didn't you throw it away?" "Because hurt things can still hold people." Molly considered this with the seriousness of a child who understood more than adults wished. Then she climbed into a chair. That night, after soup and pie, after Mark fell asleep in the living room with his shoes on, after Elise cried in the laundry room while Claire folded towels beside her without asking for details, after Molly discovered the shelf of children's books and chose 3, Claire stepped onto the porch. The fields were dark. Frogs sang in the ditch. Stars showed between clouds. Behind her, the house glowed with lamplight and human need. Not fixed, not perfect, wholly in the practical way of clean sheets, warm food, and a door not locked. Ben walked over from his truck carrying a toolbox he had forgotten earlier. He stood beside her, looking through the window at the family inside. "Your dad would be something," he said. "What?" "Quiet." He smiled. "Real quiet," which would mean happy. Claire leaned against the porch post. "I wish he could see it." Ben nodded. "Maybe he sees enough. I used to hate when people said things like that. Still can, if you want." "No," she watched Molly show her stuffed rabbit the pantry as if giving a tour. "Not tonight." Ben set the toolbox down. "You kept the table." "I had to." "Verse still there." "Not where eyes can see." "Sometimes that's all right." After he left, Claire went inside. Elise was standing at the kitchen table, reading the welcome card. "This place feels—" She stopped, embarrassed. "Old," Claire offered. Elise laughed softly. "That too. But I was going to say safe." Claire felt the words move through her like a blessing. "It was not always," she said. "But it's learning." Elise looked at her. "So are we." Later, when the house finally settled and everyone slept, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table. She opened her mother's Bible, the one now kept on a side shelf for anyone who wanted it and left closed for anyone who did not. A photograph of Harold and stood beside it, and smiling openly, Harold squinting into sun, one hand resting on the fence he had just repaired. He looked stubborn, tired, and dear. Claire ran her fingers over the table's scarred surface. She thought of the first night, the verse in dust, the way she had wiped it away in anger. At the time, she believed she had erased it. Now she knew some words are not erased by a sleeve. They sink beneath the surface. They wait. They work. She took a small card from the holder and turned it over. With a pencil, she wrote a line for herself. "Love was here before I understood it." Then she placed it inside the Bible. Years later, people would ask how the Open Table House began. Claire would tell the shorter version if time was short. An inherited farmhouse, a family story, a need, a lot of help. If they asked for the longer version, she would tell them about a woman who came home angry and found scripture in dust. She would tell them about a father who loved badly and deeply, a mother who left instructions, a neighbor who told the truth, a church that brought casseroles and crowbars, and a savior patient enough to begin with resentment because that was where the door had opened. She would not make the story too polished. She had learned that polished testimonies can make wounded people feel clumsy. She would say forgiveness took time. She would say debt still had to be negotiated, roofs still leaked, and grief still showed up uninvited. She would say faith did not erase her questions, but it gave her something holier to do with them than build walls. And sometimes, when a family arrived at the farmhouse carrying fear in laundry baskets and grocery bags, Claire would lead them to the kitchen and let them sit before explaining anything. She watched shoulders lower there. She watched children eat. She watched husbands and wives remember how to speak gently. She watched people cry over soup because kindness had found them where strength ran out. The table held all of it. One rainy night, almost exactly 2 years after Claire first returned to the farm, a young mother staying at the house came downstairs after midnight. Her baby was in treatment. Her marriage was strained. Her faith, she said, felt like a room she could no longer enter. Claire made tea. The woman sat at the table, turning a mug between her hands. "Do you ever get mad at God?" Claire smiled softly. "Yes. Still. Yes. I thought people who run places like this were supposed to be past that. Then places like this would be run by liars." The woman let out a tearful laugh. Claire rested her hand on the table. "I think Jesus can handle honest anger. I think he would rather meet us in truth than listen to us perform peace." The woman looked down. "I don't know how to pray anymore." Claire remembered Margaret Ellis in another story in another place. No, not Margaret. That was not her memory. She remembered her own mother's letter, Ben's kitchen stories, Pastor Laura's words. She remembered kneeling in snow. "Tell the truth," Claire said. "That is a prayer." The woman closed her eyes. "God, I'm tired." Claire bowed her head. "Amen." They sat without adding more. Rain whispered against the windows. The farmhouse, once abandoned, held them in the dark. After the woman went upstairs, Claire remained at the table. She turned off the lamp and let the room fill with moonlight and shadow. Dust no longer covered the surface. Too many hands used it now. Too many plates, mugs, elbows, crayons, folded letters and tired prayers. But in the darkness, Claire could almost see the old words again, not written above the wood but within it. "Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." She understood them differently now. They were not a command thrown at her pain. They were an invitation out of prison. Forgiveness had not excused what hurt her. It had released her from making hurt the sole heir of her life. It had allowed her to receive love that arrived imperfectly, late, hidden in ledgers and sacrifices, but real. It had allowed her to become, not the daughter of an indifferent man, but the daughter of a flawed man who prayed her name every morning and did not know how to say love loudly enough. Before going upstairs, Claire stepped onto the porch. The rain had softened to mist. Beyond the fields, the lights of distant homes blinked under the low Iowa sky. Somewhere a train called across the plains. The sound no longer seemed lonely to her. It seemed like something traveling faithfully through the dark, carrying unknown burdens toward morning. Claire wrapped her sweater tighter and whispered the prayer that had become familiar. Not perfect, but true. "Thank you." Then she went inside, locked the door, and left the porch light burning for whoever might arrive next.